have a little moment of silence, just radiating love and peace. How about that? Love and peace. Just a moment. And breathe. Ah, love and peace. Okay, thank you. And it's great to be here. As Dabney promised us, not only will I be talking about the first, second, and third Saturn returns, in addition, I'll be talking about just a different way of looking at Saturn. Yeah, I'm an Aquarius, so bear with me. I like to look at things in, quirky different ways just to see what comes out, looking at, oh, what if I looked at it this way? I look at life, as more of a beautiful sculpture than a painting. If we were looking at life as a sculpture, we'd all be walking around the sculpture together, and we'd see many more dimensions that we wouldn't see looking at a flat painting. So let's look at some other dimensions of Saturn together today. And I had a lot of fun with this too. Um, this is a different kind of Saturn. Look at this guy, huh? Boy, I'll talk more about why I created, with the help of AI, this vision of Saturn. Probably none of us have seen one like that before. So that's kind of fun. So yes, rewilding Saturn. So bringing Saturn back to the beginning. Getting to know Saturn. We think we know Saturn. Saturn is like an old friend, or maybe at times we don't feel so friendly towards Saturn, and we need to work on that. But and Saturn's like someone we feel like we already know, you know. And isn't that one of the most wonderful challenges in life? To take something we think we already know and begin to look at it differently, just to shake ourselves a bit, right? With Neptune and Saturn coming so close so many times over the next couple of years, we'll see a lot of things melting and disappearing in our lives on many levels. And there's some things about that are very challenging. There are also some things about that that are kind of good, because it makes us look at it differently. And so in getting to know Saturn, we got surprises. By the way, the Gottman Institute up in near Seattle, is run by two famous psychologists who are married, the Gottmans. They do wonderful research on what makes marriage work, and they're real positive stuff. And let's say people have been married 40, 50, 60 years. They interview them. What made it work this long? I love that because it's a positive approach. And it's a curious approach, assuming that people maybe haven't looked at that. And a lot of people are together for a long time, or think they know their partner, or we think we know Saturn. And maybe it pays to back up a little bit and go, gee, what if I just met you, Saturn? What are some things that I would want to get to know if I was asking open questions and not assuming I knew the answers? However, first we'll take a look at what we already know. And sometimes we've got stuff to work through about Saturn, just like we have things to work through about our parents, or about our view of the divine, or any things that might come up. So the things we thought we knew, and everything today we're going to share with honor and respect for Saturn. Of course, Saturn's day is, of course, Saturday, Saturn's day. It's a very, very old way of doing a chart and looking at things in astrology, to go back to the day of the week. Pay attention to the day of the week and the planetary hour and the month. But I do that. I do that because I learn a lot, by doing that. Now, today we're honoring the sun. It's Sunday, and we're honoring the sun and we're honoring Saturn together. Isn't that interesting? I take these things into consideration not only when I do a chart, I make talismans as well, and I do a lot of work with alchemy and magic. And I have since I was 13, when I first became an astrologer. So, first of all, I'm going to loop back to that. Let's have some fun. I'm going to make a couple little predictions. The new presence of Pluto in Aquarius, I predict, will bring out information we didn't have about Saturn and Uranus. And I think Dabby and I were chatting about that before you came on. We're going to learn more about other planets. Why are we going to learn more about Uranus? Well, they both rule Aquarius, so they both, well, how do they interrelate? Well, do we really know, why Pluto? Because Saturn is the gateway in order to get to the outer planets. We've got to do our Saturn. We've got to eat our spinach, so to speak, before we have dessert, before we get to the outer planets. So that's another reason why Saturn and Pluto are very, very interesting and correlated, in my opinion. And also, in my opinion, the business of Aquarius. And I'm an Aquarius with a stellium and Aquarius and Pisces rising. It's a bridge. Aquarius is a bridge that connects the most useful of ancient knowledge with the needs of the future in order to solve problems to assist humanity. That's my definition of Aquarius. So we're going to learn more about Aquarius is because we're going to be looking at Saturn and Uranus and really, really in an open way. Why Pluto? The ability of Pluto is to dig deep, right? Whether you're looking for a mine, or something else that's underneath the earth. I've done a fair amount of that in my astrological practice over the past 60 years, looking for stuff that's underneath, whether it's psychologically underneath or whether it's physically underneath the earth. And we're learning a lot more about what's deep underneath the earth. That's fascinating. So information from the ancient past will be and is being revealed as we talk right now at an intensive pace. This is happening. And it is fascinating. In many respects, it's a fascinating time that we made a contract to live in, isn't it? Really helpful sometimes to remember that we actually did have a choice looking at it from that perspective. Where and with whom did we want to incarnate this time in order to learn lessons? If you look at it from that perspective, which is more of an Eastern perspective, then you go, oh, I had something to do with this because there were lessons. It wasn't all done to me. So, two examples of things that we're learning about at a rapid rate, because of AI, we're translating right now as we speak cuneiform tablets from the Akkadian language. So there's languages like Akkadian that we didn't have experts to translate the tablets. And AI is helping us learn Akkadian together with AI to translate tablets. That's just happened in the past 6 months or so. It's really wonderful to look at. The research for this presentation was a lot of fun because I'm a professor, an old professor and a researcher. I love to do research, and I'll show you some of my references at the end. So recent revelation in the news. Underneath some diamond mines in Botswana, there's an underground ocean. We're going to talk about that some more. It's about 400 miles or so underneath, way underneath the crust of the earth. They've pulled diamonds up that have ocean water floating around in the diamonds. Pretty wild, huh? Interesting that happened in Botswana. I spent a fair amount of time in Botswana in South Africa doing interfaith reconciliation work. At any rate, so in a minute or two, I'll demonstrate the relevance even more to my topic today, to my second point. I'll loop back a lot. So back to that first point. We think we know Saturn, but do we really? Let's take a minute to take a look at some words we associate with Saturn. As a matter of fact, would anybody like to write in the Q&A or the chat some words and phrases they associate with Saturn? And maybe one of my moderators could share those with us. As you're writing, ask yourself, where do these words come from? Where did you learn that? How can we take a fresh approach? Why is it a good idea to do so? Why is there so little written about second and third Saturn returns? Well, we know part of the reason for that is because life expectation was a lot lower, right? When the ancients were writing about astrology, they didn't live as long as we do. So that's definitely part of the reason, but probably not the whole one.
So, Katherine, we have some words here. We've got rigidity, coldness, taskmaster, mature, mastery, duty, reward and effort, structure, contemplation, teacher, responsibility, constraint, restriction, organization, father time, father, limitation, wisdom, challenges and learning, responsibility, and discipline. So
Nicely done.
great
Well,
words.
this group is really awake.
Isn't that
Sometimes it
great?
takes,
Focus. We've got another one, focus.
oh,
So
focus. I love that. Some groups take a little longer to wake up. You guys are right with it. I love you guys. Oh my God, that's great. So yeah, very similar to what I learned too. And where do they come from? We're going to talk about that. Um, the father stuff is interesting, right? The father time, the kind of negative father projections are interesting. I'm also, in addition to a psychologist, an interfaith minister, as I mentioned. So I'm always really interested in our projections on the divine. Like you could take a group, and instead of asking about Saturn, I could ask you with your non-dominant hand, let's say if you're right-handed with your left hand, write down words that you learned and ideas from a very, very early age about God. And they would be very similar. A lot of them would be very similar to these negative father projection words. So Saturn and kind of a negative deity kind of thing get mixed up in our minds, well, for a lot of good reasons, and we'll go into some of them. And that's interesting to note because it's always wonderful to have an opportunity to challenge those ideas because we grow from it. And this business of writing in the non-dominant hand puts us back to a childhood place. So we get in touch with what those ideas were that we got and how very early they started so often. So how do we feel about Saturn and aging? I mean, is Saturn pictured as a teenager? No. Saturn is usually pictured as kind of an old guy here. Look at this picture. Nasty, huh? Like, would you want to encounter this guy? Would you want this guy to babysit your kid? I don't think so, right? So not real positive, not real nurturing, right? And do we project some of our own fears? How can we work with that? So a couple of suggestions I've already made. So where do we get these ideas? Actually, I'm going to go back here again for a minute. Where do we get some of these ideas? Well, understandably, a lot Hellenistic or post-Hellenistic writings about Saturn. But post-Hellenistic meaning from the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. What influenced our ideas about Saturn? What influenced ideas about our ideas about astrology? Well, one of the things that influenced powerful things at the time, in the Middle Ages, this Renaissance, and so on, was, of course, the Roman Catholic Church, bless their hearts. They still have, from my understanding, more of a repository of astrological books and books about gems and their healing properties than anywhere, any library on earth, is my understanding. So they're very curious about these things and at the same time ambivalent. On the one hand, there's a lot of negativity coming out about, astrology, and certainly a lot of the pictures like this, the negative ones where Saturn's really older and, kind of Dr. Death kind of thing, come out of church influenced writings. How are we going to keep astrology alive, in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and beyond when there was a lot of negative ideas about it? Well, we've got to try to comply with, what different people think and incorporate that too. Even the glyphs for the planets, I don't know how many of you know this, were influenced by church attitudes in the Middle Ages and so forth. The size and the type of cross that's used, like for Venus and so on, that and Saturn were influenced by attitudes at the time. We want to make it look more like a Christian cross and less like just an equidistant cross, which talks about the cardinal points. So yeah, a lot of big influence there. So it's worth taking a look at the art, which depicts a lot of the ideas and where we got the ideas, right? So we'll go back into that. So let's go back into a very different, let's do a real golden oldie together. We're going to go back pre-Hellenistic. I love to begin at the beginning. As I mentioned earlier on, the definition for Aquarius involved going way, way back to the beginning and taking what's useful, incorporating it from there. And very often there are solutions to present and future problems. So who was Saturn? Saturn had a different name for one thing. Saturn's name was Saturn's mother's name, sorry, was Tiamat, the primordial goddess. Tiamat. and she had a consort named Enlil. And then her first and most favorite offspring, she named Ninurta. That's who we call Saturn now. Now, this goes way back to Sumeria and Acadia. So I love this. I love the hymns to the primordial goddesses. Remember, when we're talking about a primordial goddess, we're talking about a goddess that came to us from the beginning, before there was time as we usually think of it. So it was a goddess that was an all-purpose goddess, could do everything and everything. It was way before the time when patriarchy took over and began to give goddesses different jobs. That meant that they were losing power. Back with Tiamat, she had all the power. So it was before that loss of power. I praise thee, Tiamat, she who swims among stars, she who tends to the aquariums of mind, she who was among the powers at the dawn of time. To you, lady of the abyss, to you, Tiamat Zamil. So we've got a lot of beautiful poetry and odes of various kinds to these primordial gods. And here she is. She looks kind of like a dragon snake, doesn't she? Kind of like the dragon on my teacup, if you could see that. This is a Chinese one, right? So she is all and everything. The creatrix, we refer to that as a creatrix goddess. So she could do it all because this culture, the culture that produced Tiamat, and then of course never wrote about her again. You don't see her referred to in Greek and Roman and so forth mythology. Interesting. Just like, oh, went bye-bye. And Saturn, oh, Saturn was created partially from Set, from Egypt. So Saturn was newer than this. Even the name was newer than this. So the Egyptians retained some of the Mesopotamian, early Mesopotamian ideas, and then gave in others, because remember how Hellenistic they became toward the end of the Egyptian periods of rulership because of the Greek influence. So here we have Tiamat. Here we have place where she liked to hang out a lot. We'll talk about why she liked to hang out in this oceanic place. So each culture has a unique version of their creation story and history, or herstory, right? The Hellenistic is very specific. They renamed a lot of things. And in rewriting history, what happens is that the victor usually wants to look the most powerful. So they get rid of some of the old gods or rename them. That's what happened here, right? So we renamed Saturn, we renamed Jupiter, we renamed, a lot of things. So the victor generally writes the history. So great to look earlier. So we've got, and rewriting even the functions of the gods, taking away their power with regard to Saturn. Saturn got demoted. Saturn was, or Ninurta, let's just call him Ninurta. Ninurta was real powerful. It would be like Ninurta was one of these triple million, billionaire, trillionaire types. Had a lot of power and kind of like this huge corporation. And maybe had their own, their own planes, fleet of planes and their own army and their own everything, right? And over time, as history is being rewritten, you had them lose power, right? So it would be like Ninurta lost power, lost his name first, and then lost his fleet of planes. And then he's down to one plane. And then he got rewritten again, and he's down to flying an economy in someone else's plane. Wow, that's a big demotion, right? He's not, look at this guy. He's not going to fit in economy, right? He's like 8 feet tall. No, he's taller than that, right? So at any rate, big downgrades, right? They're not real happy about that. So by the way, these real primordial gods like Saturn, who have been kind of downgraded, love it when we really give them respect, because they're not used to giving respect. We're afraid of them. We kind of avoid them because we've got funny ideas that are not so correct about them. So we kind of don't really cultivate them. Too bad, because they've got a lot of power, and everybody loves to be remembered, right? So this AI version of Nerda, how did I come up with that? So I was playing around with an AI program where you talk your vision into the program. They give you a bunch of choices as to what that vision might be, that picture might be. So I said, okay, after my research, I went, okay, let's start with what he looked like. Well, he didn't look like an old man. He was around from the beginning of time. He was not an old man. He was buff. This guy's buff, right? Also, what metals, anybody want to write on this? What metals do you remember as being associated with Saturn? Anybody wants to write on that? I'll give you a second. What metals and gems? Let's go to gems,
We've
which I
got
love looking at
lead.
gems.
Someone says lead.
Lead, that's right. Yeah. Anything else? And any gems? Just if it comes to you.
Well, I'm just gonna say from looking at this beautiful picture, lapis lazuli, but I'm not sure.
And did you ever learn that in astrology before today?
No, I've never
Oh,
the gems associated with the different
yeah,
signs or
yeah,
planets.
yeah,
That's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And I'd love
So
me some lapis.
yeah, lead and iron. And how about for stones? What are the ones not lapis like we know now? And I'll talk about why. But any stones that you associate with, well, what colors do you associate with Saturn normally? We're
Well,
gonna kind of
just
change
a
your
few
mind in a
more,
minute.
just a few more. We've got onyx, sardonyx, iron, steel, diamond, black, brown colors.
Yeah, hematite, that's a beautiful gray, isn't it? So yeah, they were generally in the black and brown and family. And look at this guy. So yeah, he's carrying a club, which by the way he talks to. It's not an object, it's a living being. He creates and destroys with this club. Yes, it's got the end of it is beautiful lapis. Why lapis? Well, don't you love lapis, right? A beautiful piece of lapis will not only be blue, but what other color will it have in it?
Maybe purple.
Yeah, it'll have gold in it because it's got gold flecks. So it
Oh,
looks like the sky at night. So it's most associated with the sky, right? Dark blue with those beautiful, beautiful gold flecks. Yeah, sometimes more of a purple than a blue, right? Beautiful, right? So he's got something to do with the sky. We know he's got to do with the earth, right? It's given us, oh, there's the sky too. Isn't that interesting? We didn't know that, right? And this is gold, I'll have you know. So it's associated from ancient times with gold and with lapis. And he's also associated from ancient times with sapphire, which is a beautiful stone. But did you know that not everybody wears sapphire well? I love blue sapphire, right? But I don't wear it well. It's not one of my best stones. Did you know that there's a thing called pink sapphire? I'm wearing it. I don't know how much you can see it. I'm wearing it around my neck today. Pink sapphire. Isn't that cool? Because what do you usually think of? What sign do you usually think of with pink?
maybe Venus or
Venus, absolutely. So how cool would it be to combine Venus and Saturn or Nerda? You get the best of both. So I wear pink sapphire really well, but blue sapphire, not so great. How could you tell? You could take a stone and spend some time with it, put it under your pillow at night, carry it for a while, see if it does anything for you. If it doesn't do anything for you, then it's not for you. If you don't feel any energy, if you don't feel like it's another living being trying to help you out, then why do it, right? Make sense? Kabish?
I think
So
people are
here's
picking
here,
up what you're putting down, Catherine. I think you're
yeah, yes, it's fun, isn't it? So let's pay attention to our bodies. Are our bodies saying this is working? If not, why are we doing it? Right? So let's take a look at some of this, and then I go back into the ancient some of the ancient translations and the academic stuff, mostly coming out of a lot of archaeology on Ninurta and Tiamat, and I get validated a lot. Oh, lapis! Here's a beautiful piece of lapis here. This is a kind of this is not only a scythe or something you can plant with, but you could obviously see that this could be used as a knife or a sword, right? This type of implement is still still produced in the Middle East to this day, used for defense and protection, and also used for planting and cultivating the earth. Isn't that interesting? And you'll notice it still has lapis depicting the sky, and then kind of a bronze together with some gold, right, from the earth. So we've got sky and earth. And don't we say that in every culture we want heaven and earth to be in balance, right? Comes right out of feng shui, right? We want to connect heaven and earth. That's what we're doing every time we do an astrology chart. I do feng shui all the time with astrology, and I don't have to see the person's house. I could do it right on Zoom with some pictures and descriptions of the rooms. So heaven and earth, basically we're looking to connect heaven and earth and have them working together and not fighting, right? So we've got every reason to look back sometimes when looking at planets. And what was he up to? What did he do? And so his cultivation implement and his club with both alive beings that he talked to, he go, okay, do this, and then he send it somewhere to do a job for him, right? So these were magical implements. He was every bit the alchemist magician god. So he's got a lot to do with the three sisters: astrology, alchemy, and magic. These are the three sisters. And what do we call them now? We call them chemistry, physics, right? Same three sisters. We used to call them something a little different. There, and I believe it's necessary to know all three to be an astrologer. And that's why at 61 years of astrologer, I'm still a baby astrologer. Nobody can learn everything you need to know, which is half the fun. I will never get bored. I'm 75, I never get bored, right? So this is a wonderful world we're depicting. Tiamat and Anerta sounds good. What happened? What happened that the Greeks, won over and rewrote things? Well, somebody came in, this guy here, Marduk. Marduk came in. Sorry, Marduk was this guy here. Sorry, Marduk came in, kind of like almost a griffin type animal. And there's Ninurta. Uh, they didn't want war. Tiamat and Ninurta, they didn't want war. They had a good deal. Things were in harmony. And then Marduk comes in and says, and does something really nasty that they couldn't ignore. So what was special about this early Mesopotamian culture? They had a tablet called the Tablet of Destiny, the original tablets of destiny. Some people think that the uh, Ten Commandments and a lot of the other early ideas about how to be a good person, playing with others, came on, were part of these tablets. So this was given at the time of creation. And Tiamat had the responsibility for keeping it safe. And Marduk, oh, what's another name for Marduk? Jupiter. Jupiter, Marduk. And that's why Jupiter did so well in the Hellenistic and Roman depictions, right, of creation stories, because Marduk successfully stole the tablets of destinies. And so Ninurta went and got them back. Marduk kept getting them back, and Marduk was able to keep them in the end. In the end, Marduk became the more powerful, and that's why Jupiter is written much more fondly of than Saturn. I love Jupiter too, don't get me wrong. But it's kind of interesting to know that, isn't it? So they kept fighting, couldn't get him back. Well, what else? What else went on in the beginning of the primordial times? They tell us that around the time that Marduk came in and stole the tablet, particularly for the final time. So this was really the beginning of the end for Tiamat and Ninurta and the power of their culture. That something had to be done, and they weren't sure what had to be done. And then it came to them that they needed to develop another race of beings. And they eventually decided that the earth had a lot to do with this race of beings. And so they were going to call them human, human beings. I'm pronouncing it like hummus because it comes from the same root word meaning earth. Human, hummus, you know, earth. So they had to develop a whole race of people. How were they going to do that? Well, Ninurta was given the job by Tiamat to do that, interestingly enough. And what were they going to do to make that happen? Well, they were going to create these beings. The gods were going to create these beings from a special kind of earth, specially rich, magical earth. Why was that earth magical? Because it had the blood of gods and goddesses mixed with the earth because they were fighting to save their culture, right? And had their blood there. So it had a lot of magic. So it was special earth. These race of human beings were going to be special, but they're not. However, most of them were not going to be gods and goddesses. However, they would have some special superpowers and unique abilities, and in some ways have similar qualities to gods and goddesses, and not be quite gods and goddesses. They were kind of a step down from that. So they knew they had to use the special earth. Where was the special earth and why? The special earth they used was the earth. If I have a picture of this, maybe. No, let me go back. Was going to be the earth. I'm going to go way back here. You see this on the left. You know, when you're walking on the beach by the ocean, sometimes you see a beautiful area with real special looking earth. It's usually an area where there's some caves or big rocks. And also you'll see it's an area a lot of times where a creek or a river runs into the ocean. It's that special magical brackish water, the brackish part, salt. Salt is part of the magic here too. And that creates a special feeling to the earth there. It's not sand, it's not dirt or soil, it's special. And it often feels like it's high energy and it's one of the reasons that it's so calming to walk by the ocean is getting our, particularly without anything on our feet, getting our feet in contact with this special magical soil. So this is the soil of the god and goddesses. How so that it was created partially by the trauma. A lot of beauty is created later on from trauma. Isn't that interesting? So we've got this special soil, we've got the gods and goddesses helping out, and we've got Tiamat saying we want to make sure that there's plenty of the special soil. So we're going to create even more of it. We know, she says, we know there are 3 oceans. We know there are 3 oceans. One of the first books I ever read about astrology, written in the 20s, I read when I was about 13. It was one of the early sentences. It was called The Celestial Ship of the North, which is what they called the heavens in Egypt. And I remember, I always remember that phrase. So there's the wonder. We look up at the clouds, particularly if we're walking by the ocean, we're looking up at the clouds. We're looking up at the sky, at the heavens, at the stars. And we're going, what is it that's so magic? And what is it when the clouds split, and there's a thunderbolt? What is that magic that happens, right? It's the magic of creation. We know it is. So, and how does this work that there are 3 skies and 3 oceans? Well, this little picture up on the left here, well, down below it is the ocean-filled diamond I told you about earlier. See, 400 miles below the ocean. And here's where the ocean meets the land, right? And here's the sky part of this, where the magic happens. It's the area between Aquarius and Pisces that has been called since primordial times the celestial sea or the celestial ocean. And astrology is considered to be the ship that navigates this ocean. Wow, right? So we've got Delphinius there. We've got Cetus, the whale, the magical whale. We've got Fomalhaut, the fixed star, which sits right on my ascendant, my natal chart. Very magical place between Aquarius, Capricorn, and Pisces.
So I just want to give you a quick time check, Katherine. We have about 20 minutes left in the presentation.
Okay, I'm gonna need a little more time than that, but yeah, okay. So this is a special place. And she said we're gonna split the sky here and create three oceans. We've got the one ocean in the sky, we've got the ocean on Earth, and then we've got the ocean 400 miles below the Earth where these magical sea-like diamonds come from. This is the stuff of magical creation. So this is, I was talking about the Egyptians, and what are some things that Saturn does that we really kind of almost forgot? We know Saturn has a lot to do with time. We know that, however, as astrologers, that there are different kinds of time. We know Saturn has to do with Cronus time. However, there's Kairos time and a bunch of other kinds of time. And the Egyptians knew that. And so they had a goddess named Ma'at, M-A-A-T, Ma'at or Ma'at, who was another side of Isis, who ruled this kind of magical time and also ruled the skies because she wanted to make sure that gravity was correct so that things wouldn't fall out of the skies. And she's not happy lately, and it's got a lot to do with planes falling out of the skies. So things that aren't supposed to fall out of the sky, falling out of the sky. She's got a lot to do with the correct mixture for healthy climate and so on. She was one of the allies of Saturn. She could be considered his consort in a way. And Themis, the Greek goddess Themis, also very similar to Ma'at. Again, they changed the name, but similar. So Saturn has a lot to do with things we haven't really talked about that much. A lot of magical things, a lot to do with time, a lot to do, and I think we're going to find this more and more with research. Here's another of my predictions: the relationship between our body clocks and the clocks, the larger clocks in the universe, and how they sync up or they don't sync up well. When they don't sync up well, we begin to have signs of difficulty with health. So Saturn, in my opinion, the research that I've done over like 35 years has a lot to do with dreams, and prodromal dreams, which involve the biology and the psyche and their link up. Resilience, psychological and physical resilience, grief and how well we do with grief, not only as individuals, but as cultures. How are we doing with our grief in the 5 years now post-COVID? We've got cultural collective grief and individual grief. We're just really getting to the anger stage as a collective, and we can see it all around us, don't we? That's got a lot to do with Saturn. And human growth and development got a lot to do, in my opinion, with all these things, and that we'll be learning more about them. Did you know that Saturn and growth and did you know that the first growth and development theorist was Ptolemy? Ptolemy had a whole grid worked out for stages of life. Many years later, in the 20th century, 1930, 1940, the growth and development researcher Erik Erikson posited his own growth and development grid. Very close, very similar in some respects. But how Ptolemy, it's so brilliant to look at life in stages, right? Before that, life was looked at, developmental stages were looked at in infancy, but they thought you didn't develop beyond infancy. You didn't really develop as an adult. We now know that's, of course, not true. Ptolemy, of course, ended his kind of early, right? Because people died earlier. The Saturn stage was old age, 67 plus. But yet over here, we've got the 40 to 65 stage coming up to the going through your second Saturn return and second Saturn opposition. And then here, integrity versus despair, coming up to your third Saturn opposition and your third Saturn return. So I looked at my own chart a little bit because that can be helpful sometimes. So I was asked, I've done a lot of research on dreams over, about a 50-year period since I've been a psychologist. And I was taking a look at the relationship between Saturn cycles and dreams. And when I was at my first Saturn cycle, when I was about 20, I was invited by, I mean 30, I was invited by the the International Society for the Study of Dreams to present my research on astrology and dream work and life cycles. And so I did that. And then in my second Saturn opposition, when I was in my mid-40s, that's the Uranus opposition for a lot of people, plus the second Saturn opposition. And it's a very significant time. So that would be around 44, 45. The same organization, the Society for the Study of Dreams, got in touch with me and said, "Would you present what's been happening with your research in all these, the past 30 years?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'd love to." And they said, "Okay, here's your date of presentation." And just for the heck of it, I did, of course, my chart for the day and time of when they scheduled me. And don't you know, uh, that was during my second opposition, second Saturn opposition. And also Saturn was going right over my ascendant, which is in Pisces there. So it was opposing my natal Saturn and going over my ascendant. Significant times when we have a chance to recreate ourselves, and move ahead and really have a real important time in our creation stories are often the oppositions and the Saturn returns. So, and Saturn has a lot to do with mundane astrology too. Like I just mentioned about COVID, Saturn and mundane astrology. The Civil War. Did you know more people died in the Civil War than any other war we've been involved in? I didn't know that. 2% of the population. So, someone from the family or family would go off to war, and you had no idea what ever happened to them because there were no phones or internet or anything, right? They're just gone. So you were in a stage of suspended grief that couldn't be resolved quite often, unresolvable because you didn't know, well, what happened, right? Enormous collective grief. So, and really wasn't any way at that time to talk about it. We didn't have hospice. Mainly religions weren't that open to talking about the phenomenon that common grief to do with death, like the spiritual phenomenon, the dreams that come in, the feeling the presence of the person who's physically gone, but emotionally and spiritually still there, and so on. So a lot of times it wasn't okay to talk about it in a more traditional religious sense. However, these were important spiritual things. So at that time, the spiritualist movement came from France and then to the United States around the 1840s and the East Coast. And by the time of the end of the Civil War, that spiritual movement became tremendous, and it was all through the United States and very popular. So people had a chance to get together in groups to talk about their dreams, to talk about their grief, and to spread these ideas about spirituality not having to be necessarily the same as more conventional religion. So what happened as a result? One of the things that happened as a result is that the Chicago World's Fair in 1899 began to be planned around 1893. So 30 years, a Saturn return after the Civil War, you had people saying, we want to talk about these things. We want a forum to talk about these things at the Chicago World's Fair because that's going to be a huge international meeting. So they got it. They got a forum, which still exists today, called the Parliament of World Religions. It happens every 5 years, maybe more uh, frequent now. I presented two of these. So opportunities with 10 or 12,000 people from every religion around the world and every tribal group meeting in peace. Never been any violence. Every 5 years, different place in the world to talk about spiritual things and work together on things. So that very important organization got started. What else happened that was an opportunity for recreate us to recreate ourselves after the Saturn and Virgo Civil War? A lot of wars, a lot of big wars, and things happen with Saturn is in Virgo, and pandemics. Interesting enough, Virgo health. So we had also many inventions that took place in that time: the telegraph, the telephone, light bulb. So a lot of things that were major in recreating ourselves, recreating the world, and facilitating communication. So Saturn brings in a lot of gifts, not only takes. We know Saturn takes. We don't often remember to give Saturn credit for giving something back to replace it with. So that's something to remember about Saturn. There's good stuff it brings in. So we had the inventions, spiritualism, all of this wonderful stuff. And here's another thing. I'm not going to go into this one. It's just another example. Let's talk about the Rolling Stones for a minute, because we can not only talk about individuals and their Saturn returns, we can talk about mundane. We can talk about groups that have been together a long time. The Rolling Stones have been together long enough that they've had actually two full Saturn returns. So as a group, they've been together more than 60 years. That's pretty impressive, right? And how did that affect them? And isn't that marvelous? So they're together after all these years, they're in their 80s. So you had each Saturn return brought a loss, somebody leaving the group or somebody dying. And they had to make a redecision. Are we going to continue? And are we going to continue along the same lines? Or how is our sound similar? How is it different? How are we going to grow? Right? And here's the young guys, the young Stones, and here's the Stones today. Do you know what they did this outer ring here on their last most recent Saturn return? There's Saturn in Aquarius. And no, yeah, Saturn in Aquarius. So both times they had to regroup and decide who are we now. And this second Saturn return, they created a whole new original album that they wrote after being together for 60 years. Isn't that amazing? And several of them are still the original people. Really amazing. That just happened like a year and a half ago. So pretty darn amazing. How about Bruce Springsteen? He's a guy, interestingly enough, I didn't know much about him. He's about my age. He's another Saturn in Virgo. He's 75. And he's had two complete Saturn returns and now his third opposition. Like a lot of Saturn in Virgos, he's a very hard worker and he'll work himself literally into the ground. That's happened twice where he's collapsed at big international concerts that he was playing at because he didn't listen to his body and he had a serious ulcer condition. So Bruce is a guy who's very open about his life. He doesn't have any secrets. So I feel okay talking about him. So let's look at the first Saturn square around 7, right? So he was 7 years old, 1957. If any of you are old enough, you might remember the Ed Sullivan Show. You might remember that Elvis Presley was on the Ed Sullivan Show and played Hound Dog. And somebody was smart, probably his mother, and let him stay up late. And Bruce Springsteen saw it. And he saw it and he said, "Ah, that's me. There's something about that that's me, you know." And at the same time, they had switched him, his mom and dad. His dad was not an easy guy to live with, was an alcoholic and a rageaholic, and was not very nice to Bruce. His mother really kind of brought him through a lot of really painful times. So at 7, he knew something about himself, that music was really important. At about 7, he was switched from public school to Catholic school. And he was miserable at first, and then he was very happy about it because he realized they had a choir. And he started singing Latin and English in the choir and loved it. So he loved to sing. He learned that about himself. At that opposition, very often, that first opposition, there's a challenge presented. Something will change in the child's family. Maybe there's a divorce, or something is really painful. And a lot of people will remember back to that time. Go, gee, that was a terrible time. Although I like to see people put it a little bit fast forward from 7 to maybe 9 or 10, when they're having the first Saturn trine. Very often that thing to compensate for the pain will come in. Maybe they had a tough time at their first square, but something's given. Maybe a parent is taken, maybe another parent comes in, maybe there's, some family friend that helps to make up for the painful loss of the first parent, or something like that's this big that comes in to compensate. So this has to do with the resilience. Saturn gives us the resilience and patience to remember as we're getting older. Oh, I've been through something painful before and I've survived it. I'm going to survive this, and things are going to get better over time. So look a couple of years later after that first square. So the first opposition was very interesting. He was given, so age 14, 15, he was given a guitar for his birthday by his mom. What he did was he took the guitar and he stood in front of a full-length mirror and started to play the guitar and realized that for the first time in his whole life, he liked himself. So he got in touch with his superpower. This was, so we get in touch with it, that first opposition, often something that we're just really good at. We got a gift, something special, or someone special presents, something special presents. And that was his something special. And of course, it brought him through all kinds of things his whole life. So he realized suddenly that there was more to life than what he'd been living. He was then in pursuit of something, and there'd been a vision laid out. That first vision, that first Saturn opposition. Very important, Tom. And of course, from there, he put together a band not long later, and he started playing in public. And he started playing in Manhattan, like in his 60s, in the village, Cafe Wa and some of the little cafes that I remember from my period there. I was about his age. Lots of talent coming out, lots of talent being recognized. And there he was, right? The Jersey guy, and a lot of big successful groups came from Jersey. And then around his second Saturn return, he had two other losses. He lost a good friend, a good personal friend, and he lost a bandmate. And his friends and his bandmate very similar, because he knew both these people for many, many years, dating back to his teens. A lot of his bandmates are people he's known that long. So they're also close, close friends. Two major losses around the second Saturn return, and gifts of a new band member coming into his life, new creative activities, and world tours. So he got the gift of resilience going down the line. And now his third Saturn opposition, which he's just coming out of, he had his second major brush with a serious illness. He had a very, very serious ulcer, and he collapsed on the stage while he was doing a world tour. That's one of the hardest lessons for Saturn and Virgo people, because we're very hard workers and we tend to forget about our bodies. So he realized he had to remember about his body. And what he needed to remember was something that he learned from an early age, that he loved to be close to the earth, and he loved the river, and he liked to kayak. And that's one of the things that keeps him emotionally and spiritually healthy. And he learned to make a commitment to that again from his boyhood. So there's a lot he learned. By the way, just a quick note, his first Saturn return when he was about 29 was really one of the toughest times in his life. He had a deep depression and really didn't want to do anything, real deep depression. And in his outer life, things looked great. He was an international star. Also, Bruce became known internationally as a songwriter before they knew him as a song performer. And so, a lot of his songs by that age were performed by the Pointer Sisters and all kinds of people, amazing. But he was at his lowest internally. And what he decided to do about it, because he didn't want to become an alcoholic like his dad, and he didn't get into drugs like some of his bandmates. So he had to find another way to deal with it. What he did was he bought his family boyhood home, which was right on a river he loved to spend time in as a kid. And he moved into the home and to his old bedroom, which had an orange shag carpet. And he created a lot of music there as he was coming out of his depression. He was able to look at himself real deeply for the first time. And he created the album that's still his critically most favorite album, called Nebraska. And Bob Dylan and a lot of music critics still say that's his best album. So the part of him that's earthy, that wears, blue work shirts and likes to spend time, in the hiking and gardening, and the part of him that loves acoustic music and folk music, that part of him had to be kept alive and nurtured as he was getting more into the rock and roller. And that part of him, the earthy part, kept him balanced. So he didn't get into drugs. He didn't get into, alcohol. So that's what was that first tough, real tough Saturn return. His second Saturn return, when he was in his late 50s, he was also getting depressed. but he knew, because he knew himself well enough, that he could do something about it earlier, so he didn't go into the deep depression. One of the things he did was to get into therapy. Another thing he did was he realized he needed to help other people, which is something we realized, particularly in that second Saturn return. I've got to do something to help others. And he did a book that was very public book about his autobiography that talked about his dad's rageaholicism and alcoholism, and talked about Bruce's struggle with his mental health and so on. Very, very openly. He did a documentary around that. And now, with his second Saturn opposition, he's working on an update of his autobiography. And I think there's going to be a movie about his life coming out next year. So as he's going from his third Saturn opposition in his mid-70s through that Saturn closing square that will eventually lead him to his third Saturn return, he's sharing and really, really helping other people a lot.
Hi, Catherine. I just want to let you know that we're at the hour now. So
Okay.
we usually can go, a little bit over, but would you like me to give you some of the questions now, or would you like to kind of finish up your presentation
I'm,
first?
I'm, I'm closing. It's going to take about 5 minutes.
Okay, sounds great. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I wanted to give an example. I have lots of examples, as you can see, and I don't have to use every of them, right? But I wanted to give an example of somebody we all know, and in my case, love, Paul Simon, the musician. And he's coming up to his third Saturn return, which happens in our mid-80s. So is Mick Jagger, I think. And at any rate, so I wanted to talk about the closing square, which I opened up, a minute ago, talking also about Bruce Springsteen. They're both in their closing square for their third Saturn return. In order to answer the question, what's so special about the third Saturn return? How is it different, right? The first Saturn return, often we learn something pivotal about ourselves, you know, that we that we build on for the next Saturn returns and the rest of our lives. The second Saturn return, we learn the importance of sharing what we've learned with other people, right? And the third Saturn return, we learn about our own attitudes about our spirituality, and something will happen to make us investigate it, really deeply. Paul Simon thought he was either an atheist or an agnostic his whole life. Now he's not so sure. And we have something that happens usually that's a wake-up call to death, to really make us look at it in our hearts. How do I really feel about death? What is it? Is there something that comes later or not? And our relationship with the divine and the universe, what's this all about? And that's Paul Simon. He's in that closing square. So he had a lot. His theme, often there's a theme in the three Saturn returns that'll be opened in the first, and then we go deeper in the other two. In Paul Simon's example, one of his themes was the struggle with whether there's something bigger than just me out there. Is there a God? Is there not a God? What happens after we die? Another theme, and that's not unrelated, was his feeling about partnering with people to create things. He has had difficulty from the beginning giving credit to other people. When he was married, and this is his third marriage, and he's been married over 30 years, and he has several children. So he learned a lot over the years, enough to have a stable marriage. And he found someone who's also very creative, a musician as well, I think, which really helped. He had his biggest struggle in giving credit to some other people was, of course, with Art Garfunkel. And he had difficulty saying that they should equally share some of the albums because, of course, it's Paul Simon that wrote almost all the songs. However, Art Garfunkel sang on many of his albums with Paul Simon. And that was really a problem for him. And one day he was talking about it again to his mother. And his mother had heard all this before about their falling outs. Art and Paul would have falling outs, and then they get together again, and a falling out and get together, very much like a divorce and then a marriage again. And so his mother looked at him right in the eyes and said, Paul, you are so talented and such a wonderful song, a writer of songs, and you're a good singer. However, that said, art has the voice of an angel. And the popularity of some of those albums is there, in my opinion, because both of you sang together. And that must have been, I'd like to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. It must have been real hard for Paul to hear. But so it's clear that other people picked up on that issue. So at any rate, what happened as a result of this? Yes, I don't know if any of you have heard his most recent album. It came out last year, about a year ago, and he wrote and the whole thing, and it's and sang it as well himself. He's written a lot of albums out of a dream. And this is a series of dreams where he was dictated what to write, how many minutes it would be, and that he was told in the dream to have it be a certain number of minutes and not beyond that, and to tell people that they were to listen to the album all in one sitting. It's like 44 minutes or something, I forget. So you could listen to it easily online, and if you do, it's just beautiful. And it's called Seven Psalms. So isn't that interesting? It's written about something that's biblical for somebody who's been an atheist or an agnostic most of his life. One of my favorite parts of it really sums up where he is coming into his third Saturn return. Dip your hand in heaven's waters, God's imagination. Dip your hand in heaven's waters, all of life's abundance in a drop of condensation. Dip your hand in heaven's waters. I have my reasons to doubt. There is a case to be made. 2 billion heartbeats and out. A white light eases the pain, or does it all just begin again? Dip your hand in heaven's water. That's beautiful poetry. And really, I got an amazing write-up from one of the Times critics because of the quality of the poetry. So there he is dealing with those issues. And here are my resources. I'm kind of closing off here. Here's some resources. And I want to thank Chris Brennan because he's had several shows on pre-Hellenistic astrology that really helped me, and also my references where I was going into the cuneiform translations. Very, very helpful, some of the academic writings coming out of archaeology. And this is how to reach me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Katherine. So here are a few of the questions. For a Capricorn or Aquarius rising with a night chart, is Saturn bound to always be a challenge?
Oh, great question. We learn that Saturn is going to be more of a challenge, particularly if we study Hellenistic astrology. We learn that's one of the basics, right? One of the first things I learned in Hellenistic tradition, which I love, and I want to challenge it. I think there's exceptions to every rule, and I think it's important to look for the rules and then look for the exceptions.
Lovely. Okay, from your perspective and experience, what is the real meaning of any of the Saturn return in the life of an individual?
Oh, thank you for the question. And I hope the presentation helped because I'm looking at this really in terms of our growth and development. So we're growing and developing, and this really helps us to grow and development. At first, it may seem like, oh my God, that's so painful, or something was taken away from me. However, I have a thing that I call the Saturn timeline. I like doing workshops on this material with fewer people where we can take your chart and do a timeline. And you can do that real easily. You can go to Astro-Saturn calculator for free.com, Astro-Seek SaturnCalculator.com. And for free, you can pull up your lifelong Saturn timeline. And it helps you if you set up that timeline and then do another column of information. That's the real important events in your life that happened around Saturn cycles, and line them up, the Saturn cycles and the important events. And you can see, just like I began to do that with these charts, right? You can see, the devastating depression that happened, for instance, with Bruce. at his first Saturn return. You'll notice his second Saturn return, he didn't need to have a devastating depression. He began to get depressed and he caught it in time. He got in therapy, right? He started giving more stuff and teaching more and giving more charitable stuff, right? And he made sure he continued to pay attention to his acoustic work because that part of him has to be addressed or he's really unhappy with himself. So those were some remediations he did, right? To balance that problem of depression happening. And then for his third, I suspect that I suspect it'll be something spiritual, not unlike what what Paul Simon did. Remember Paul Simon for his first it was generally divorced, and his second a divorce and difficulties in his partnership with Art Garfunkel. And in his third, coming into his relationship with the divine, maybe he doesn't have to be the number one guy who gets all the credit anymore. You know what I mean? Maybe there's more humility. So that might be a life theme, how he did in partnerships, how he handled it at different stages of his growth. I hope, does that help the question?
Yeah, I think that's, I'm sure it's helpful. As a collective species, will we ever evolve for these global changes without going through wars, plagues, without putting people in harm's way? Um, this time around would be nice. Well, wouldn't that be nice if we had the answer to that?
Yeah, yeah. I am fascinated with that question. And as a result, I am doing another presentation that's got more of the mundane. You know how I went into the mundane example from the Civil War? I've got a lot of other wonderful mundane astrology examples because I also want to talk about where we are from COVID in this first five. So we're in, we're coming up to the trine. I didn't talk about the trine. There's a Saturn trine too, right? So, we're coming up to and a lot of that will have to do with a lot of the inventions that are happening, and those things. And a lot of it will have to do with how well we let ourselves grieve as a collective. I think it's no accident that the spiritualist movement, with its channeling and seances and meditation and dream work and collective work in groups, really helped with the Civil War grief, right? I believe that that's coming back again, along with astrology and a lot of the metaphysical things that will give us collective tools to help and do a better job with our grieving. Because I think a lot of what we're going through in challenges has to do with our problems with resolving the grieving. We're at the anger stage. You can see it all around us, right? The anger stage of the collective grief from COVID.
Right.
We see it all around us. And one of the things goes with the anger stage is what's called black and white thinking.
Mhm.
That's what happened after the plague so many times with the witch trials. They started at about that at about that first square, about 7 years after the plague. And a lot of times the plague happened, you have another 7 years, and people will be doing the black and white thinking, and they'd round up more witches again
Wow.
and kill them.
An interesting correlation.
Yeah.
Wow. So
That'll
another
be a fun
question.
presentation. I'm in the middle of that right now.
Interesting. Well, I'm looking forward to that. What sources do you use as a database to research history with AI? Is the Vatican's library available for that research?
Oh, I'd love to know that. I don't research history with AI. I used AI, a free AI program where you can talk, like I talked a description of my fantasy of what Ninurta looked like. Here's what from my research, right? From the cuneiform tablet research. Because it mentioned the lapis, the gold, and all the stuff, right? So I thought, what if I mention these things and see what kind of images they came up with? They came up with 9 images, right? And one looked good. And so I started with that and made changes where I needed to make it.
Yeah, very cool. So I don't totally understand this question, but I'm going to ask it because you may understand it. What about those who have a Saturn return before they're 9 months old? So, I mean, I'm imagining he's talking about like the exaction with retrogrades, but I think that's, my guess is it's not really something that we're going to take that seriously in an.
I don't know, but I'd love to know. Thank you for the question. I'm curious minds want to know. I've got to write that down. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I've never heard about anybody talking about that being a big thing, but it might be that the baby kind of goes through a little bit of a challenging time or a growth spurt or something like that is what I would guess. Okay, last question. What do you think about the relationships of Moon with Saturn? Conjunct, opposition, square, etc.
Yeah. I think that there's ways in, particularly from Tibetan astrology, which I enjoy, um, to what we call remediation now, although they call it other things. Let's say there's ways to balance things, right? Like what are some gems you associate with the moon that are in harmony with you that you might have already tried already? What are some gems that in are in association with Saturn that work with you? Putting them together, like you know how I mentioned that I'm wearing this pink sapphire, right? So we've got Venus and Saturn together, right? And I'm wearing it on gold, and we're presenting on Sunday. So I'm honoring the gold, and the gold that's in Nerda's equipment there. He's got a lot of gold, right? And I'm using the pink because I have a good relationship with my Venus, and a sapphire, which is a Saturn. It's hard to find that. I didn't think I found it in a book, because everywhere it'll say sapphire, blue, assuming blue, right? But blue sapphire doesn't do anything for me. It's beautiful, but energetically, I don't get a hit off it. And rely on yourself about what gems work, because you could put them together in a piece of jewelry or, or something in order to, or make a talisman. I love making talismans, really funky homegrown ones, not fancy expensive ones, but but really by combining gems together with mantra and prayer and ritual. And I do a lot of Tibetan ritual in mine because that's just I have a lot of background in that. And that the Tibetan way, I just have learned a lot about it, been fortunate. So that if it helps to think about ways of remediating or ameliorating or getting things in balance, whatever you want to call it, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. All right. Well, Catherine, this has been very interesting. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And again, thank you, Catherine. I think it was very enlightening. And as always, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful time and
Can,
we'll see you
can
next
I
month.
mention one more thing?
Absolutely.
If they want my tips sheet, I'm an old professor, so I always like to summarize things and give a tip sheet to people can look at later if they want to. If
Yeah.
they want to, they're welcome, like to email me. This is, you see, tips and suggestions. And
Great.
so this summarizes a lot of things, uh, that some people might find this interesting, some not. But I think it's good educational form, learning and teaching to have something like that. So if you want to email me, you could get that from me. And here's how to reach me. By the way, there's my website. My email is drcatherine2@gmail.com.
So thank you again and have a good Sunday, everyone.
Thank you and bless you, everybody. Peace.